My brother texted, "Hope you die alone, you pathetic loser." A few hours later, my parents called. "Your brother is in the hospital. Send $15,000 now or he will die." I hung up and went back to sleep. Then everything blew up. When the sun finally hit my Denver floorboards, the silence felt heavy. My phone stayed dark on the nightstand. I already knew the script by heart. Every crisis was a withdrawal. Every tragedy had a price tag attached to my name. I made a pot of French press coffee. The smell of dark roast filled the kitchen. I checked my laptop instead of my phone. The balance in my savings account stared back at me. It represented 8 years of bridge stress, calculations, and missed vacations. I thought about the 28,000 I paid for Jace's failed tuition. My parents called that a family investment. To me, it was a year of sleeping 4 hours a night. The tally in my head never stops climbing. At noon, I finally powered on my phone. The screen nearly caught fire with notifications. 61 missed calls, and a flood of texts from my mother screamed of betrayal. I opened the link Savannah sent. It was a video of her crying in a hospital hallway. The lighting was perfect for a tragedy. She told 10,000 followers that I was letting Jace die for a few dollars. My coworkers were already tagging me in the comments. The digital mob had found its new villain. The casino called 20 minutes later. A woman with a flat voice asked to verify my address on a credit application. My chest went cold. Jace had used my old Denver residence to secure markers for his Tahoe spree. He didn't just want my money this time. He was wearing my skin to gamble. I asked for the compliance officer's name and a case number. I hung up and opened a fresh folder on my desktop. Evidence is the only thing that silences a liar. My father called from the airport. He sounded like he had aged 20 years in a day. He admitted Jace wasn't dying. The 15 grand was for a debt that involved dangerous people. He begged me to take out a personal loan to save the family house from foreclosure. They had already mortgaged it twice to cover Jace's bookies. My mother was wailing in the background. I realized then that they weren't my parents anymore. They were just customers at a bank I closed. I drove to the county jail 3 weeks later. Jace sat behind the glass in an orange jumpsuit. He looked small and gray under the fluorescent lights. He didn't ask for money this time. He slid a folder across the table, filled with Savannah's handwritten scripts for the viral videos. She had planned the doxing campaign weeks before they even left for Tahoe. Jace offered to testify against her if I paid for his rehab. The golden child was finally selling out the princess. I stared at the handwritten notes through the reinforced glass. Savannah's looping script detailed exactly how to fake a sob for the camera. Jace watched me with a hollow, hungry look that made my skin crawl. He wasn't asking for brotherhood or forgiveness. This was a business transaction in a room that smelled like floor wax. I realized Savannah wasn't just the princess of the family anymore. She was a director, and Jace was her lead actor. The counselor, in the corner, checked her watch with clinical indifference. I stood up and tucked the folder under my arm. Jace tapped the glass with one pale finger. "If you don't pay the facility, I go back to the general population," he whispered. I didn't answer him. I walked through the heavy steel doors and into the bright Denver sun. My objective was simple. I had to verify the documents before the family burned me alive. The parking lot was silent except for the wind. I sat in my truck and opened the discovery packet again. A receipt from a boutique in Tahoe fell out of the pages. Savannah had bought a rose gold bracelet for $42,000 while claiming they were broke. The date on the slip was the same night they called about the emergency. She was wearing my potential mortgage on her wrist. The cruelty of the timing finally broke my heart. My lawyer's office was located in a converted brick warehouse downtown. I showed him the handwritten scripts and the boutique receipt. He didn't look surprised. He just started a timer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "This is premeditated wire fraud," he said. He explained that Savannah's GoFundMe campaign was built on a documented lie. If I pushed forward, she would face a felony. I had to decide if I was ready to destroy her. I walked to a nearby coffee shop to think. My phone buzzed with a notification from a cousin I hadn't seen in years. It was a link to a new petition Savannah had started. She was calling for my engineering license to be revoked for moral turpitude. The public comments were a toxic swamp of judgment. People were calling my office and leaving death threats. The pressure was moving from my wallet to my entire professional future. I called the hospital social worker one last time. I needed to be absolutely certain about the medical records before I struck. She confirmed that Savannah had requested photos of Jace's injuries be made to look more severe for insurance. It was all a curated performance for the digital masses. I realized then that my sister was more dangerous than Jace. She didn't just want my money. She wanted to erase my reputation for the sake of views. I drove home and opened my laptop with steady hands. I drafted an email to the district attorney and attached the scanned scripts. I also included the boutique receipt and the hospital social worker's contact information. I hit send and watched the loading bar disappear. The war was no longer about a few $1,000s in a casino. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. I had become the monster they always said I was. The cold blue light from my laptop screen felt like a scalpel. My employer's HR director called 10 minutes after I sent the evidence. Her voice was taut and professional. She told me the death threats against the firm were becoming a liability. I was being placed on administrative leave until the police finished their investigation. My career was on a breathing tube. I closed the lid and gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. I drove back to the jail to finalize the deal with Jace. I needed his formal signature on the affidavit naming Savannah. He was sitting in the same plastic chair, looking even thinner. "The money for rehab first," he croaked, tapping the table. I realized he wasn't looking for a fresh start. He was looking for another score. I slid the paper toward him without saying a word. He signed it while his hand shook with desperate, jagged movements. I walked to the clerk's office and paid the $8,000 for the facility. I made sure the check went directly to the medical board. No cash would ever touch Jace's fingers again. As I walked out, my phone chimed with a new notification. Savannah had posted a photo of our mother collapsed on a kitchen floor. The caption claimed I was the reason they were homeless. She was burning the whole world to save her brand. The DA's office called me as I reached my truck. They had reviewed the files and Savannah's handwritten scripts. A warrant for her arrest was being processed for felony fraud. The detective sounded almost impressed by the level of her planning. "She didn't just lie," he said. "She built a financial trap." I felt a sudden, sharp pang of regret. I was about to put my sister in a cage. Then I remembered the rose gold bracelet. I went to my parents' house one last time. The yellow foreclosure notice was taped to the front door like a scar. I saw my mother through the window, packing boxes in the dark. She looked up and our eyes met for a brief second. She didn't wave or cry. She simply closed the blinds and disappeared into the shadows. I realized the house was already dead. Jace and Savannah had stripped the copper from the walls years ago. I spent the evening at a quiet bar near the park. I needed to feel like a normal person for an hour. A news report on the television caught my eye. It was a segment about online fundraising scams and ethics. Savannah's face flashed on the screen under a headline about modern fraud. The story was moving faster than the law. My sister was finally famous for all the wrong reasons. I finished my drink and paid the tab. I returned home to find a man waiting by my door. He was wearing a cheap suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "Brett," he asked. I nodded and braced for another threat. He handed me a folded envelope and walked away without a word. I opened it under the porch light. It was a civil summons from my parents. They were suing me for the remainder of their retirement. The war was just entering its second act. I stared at the summons while the porch light flickered. My parents were suing me for filial support and emotional distress. It was a desperate move to extract my last remaining assets. I felt a cold surge of resolve as I stepped inside. My objective shifted from defense to total erasure. I needed to find the original loan documents from Jace's first bailout. If I could prove the pattern, their lawsuit would crumble. The fight was finally reaching its end. The basement air was thick with the scent of old cardboard. I tore through boxes of tax returns and bank statements. My hands found a dusty blue folder hidden at the bottom. Inside was a signed agreement from 10 years ago. Jace had promised to repay the tuition money in full. My father had notarized it himself. This was the proof of a loan, not a gift. It changed the entire legal landscape of their greedy demands. My phone vibrated against the concrete floor. It was a restricted number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard Savannah's voice, sharp and frantic. She wasn't crying for the cameras this time. She offered to drop the social media campaign if I gave her $20,000. She needed to flee before the warrant went live. I realized she was truly cornered now. I hung up without saying a single word. She was already a ghost to me. I met my lawyer at a midnight diner to review the folder. The neon sign hummed above our booth. He scanned the notarized agreement and whistled low. "This negates their claim of financial abandonment," he said. He explained that their lawsuit was effectively dead on arrival. We could countersue for the original debt plus interest. I looked at the grease stains on the table. Winning felt like a heavy, cold stone in my stomach. A sudden commotion at the diner entrance drew my attention. Two police officers walked in and headed straight for the back. I saw Savannah huddled in the last booth, trying to hide her face. She had been tracked through her latest social media login. They handcuffed her right in front of the breakfast crowd. Her designer watch glinted under the harsh lights. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The director's final scene was a disaster. I walked out into the cool night air. My lawyer followed me, looking satisfied with the night's work. "It's over, Brett," he said, patting my shoulder. I nodded but felt a strange hollow sensation in my chest. The family was gone, replaced by legal filings and police reports. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool metal of my keys. I had my life back, but the silence was deafening. I was finally alone in the dark. I drove back to my apartment and sat in the dark. My email chirped with a final message from my father. He wasn't begging or threatening me anymore. He told me they were leaving the state in the morning. They were moving in with an aunt I had never met. He said I was no longer his son. I deleted the message and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a new credit alert. The credit alert was a sharp needle in the dark. Someone had tried to open a high-interest payday loan using my social security number in Nevada. I realized Jace had not surrendered all his notes. My objective was now a total digital lockdown. I sat at my desk and opened my encrypted vault. Every account was a potential breach. I changed every password with trembling fingers. The betrayal was deeper than a single casino marker. Jace had kept a backdoor to my life. I spent the next hour freezing my credit with every major bureau. The process felt like boarding up windows before a hurricane. My primary obstacle was the sheer volume of data Jace had stolen. He knew my first dog's name and my mother's maiden name. Every security question was a joke to him. I felt exposed and hunted in my own home. I realized I could never truly delete the past. My history was a weapon in his shaky, desperate hands. A new email arrived from the rehab facility. Jace had checked out against medical advice only 2 hours after arriving. He had convinced a nurse that I had authorized his release for a family emergency. The $8,000 I paid was non-refundable. He was back on the street with the affidavit still pending in court. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. The deal was a scam from the very beginning. Jace had played me for a fool again. I checked my doorbell camera and saw a dark sedan idling across the street. The driver didn't move for 10 minutes. I grabbed my car keys and turned off every light in the house. I watched through the blinds as the car slowly rolled away. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I realized Jace wasn't just hiding, he was hunting for a quick payout. He knew I was the only person with liquid cash left. The realization hit me that I had to lure him out. I sent a single text to his burner number. "I have the rest of the cash you wanted," I wrote. I set the location as a well-lit grocery store parking lot. I needed a public space with cameras and witnesses. He replied within seconds with a location of his own. He wanted to meet at the old bridge site where I first started working. He was getting poetic. I drove to the site with a heavy iron wrench under my seat. The bridge was a skeleton of steel and concrete against the moon. I saw Jace standing near the edge of the embankment. He looked like a ghost in the headlights. "You shouldn't have come alone, Brett," he said. His voice was steady for the first time in years. I saw a second shadow move behind the concrete pillar. It was my father holding a heavy iron bar. My father stepped into the light with a look of pure, cold desperation. He didn't look like a parent, he looked like a predator. Jace reached for my bag, thinking it was full of money. I realized they had planned this together while Savannah was being booked. The entire family had collapsed into a pack of thieves. I didn't feel fear anymore. I only felt a deep, cleansing sense of hatred. My father raised the bar and took a step. The iron bar glinted under the moon. My father took a heavy step forward, his eyes fixed on my hands. He didn't see a son anymore. He saw a solution to his mounting debts. I shifted my weight and felt the cold wrench beneath my driver's seat. The bridge skeleton loomed behind them like a cage. My objective was simple. I had to survive the night without becoming a killer myself. The air smelled of damp concrete and motor oil. I realized then that my childhood was finally buried here. Jace reached for my jacket, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes and desperation. "Just give us the bank codes, Brett," he hissed. I shoved him back against the concrete pillar. He stumbled, his lack of sleep making him clumsy. My father raised the iron bar higher, his knuckles white in the shadows. He looked like a man who had run out of lies to tell himself. I didn't say a word. I just watched his feet. He was shaking. The man was terrified of his own first-born son. I pulled the heavy wrench from the floorboard. The weight of the steel felt grounding in my palm. The codes won't save the house. Dad, I said. My voice was a flat, dead thing in the night air. He stopped moving, the iron bar wavering in his grip. Jace spat on the ground and looked at the water below. I realized they hadn't told each other the whole truth yet. They were a team built on hollow promises and shifting sand. The power balance was starting to tilt in my favor. My father looked at Jace with a sudden, sharp suspicion. "What do you mean? They won't save the house?" he asked. His voice was a ragged whisper. I told him about the secondary markers Jace had opened in Nevada. I explained that the foreclosure was already finalized by the county. There was no house left to save. Jace tried to interrupt, but his face had gone pale and waxen. The betrayal was now circular. Jace had been lying to the man holding the iron bar. It was a beautiful, dark mess. Jace lunged at me with a jagged cry of rage. I stepped aside and let him crash into the concrete. He lay there, gasping for air as his broken ribs screamed. My father dropped the iron bar. It hit the pavement with a loud, ringing chime that echoed under the bridge. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. The primary obstacle was gone, but the pressure remained. I watched him sink to his knees. He looked small. He looked like a man who finally realized he was alone. I stood over my brother and watched him struggle to breathe. There was no pity left in my chest. I only felt a sense of structural failure. He had been the crack in the foundation for 32 years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. I dialed the number for the detective handling Savannah's fraud case. I needed to finish the job properly. Jace looked up at me with tears in his bloodshot eyes. He knew exactly what was coming next. The detective answered on the third ring. I told him. I had found the missing link in the identity theft ring. My father looked up at me, his face a mask of silent horror. I gave the detective our exact coordinates at the bridge. I stayed on the line until I heard the distant wail of sirens. Jace tried to crawl away, but he was too weak to move. I realized that I was the one holding the iron bar now. I didn't need to swing it to win the war. The blue and red lights flooded the embankment within minutes. Officers swarmed the bridge, their boots crunching on the gravel. They handcuffed Jace first, then my father. Neither of them said a word as they were led to the cruisers. I watched the taillights disappear into the dark Denver night. The silence returned, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. I looked at the wrench in my hand and threw it into the river. It splashed once and was gone. The bridge was finally empty. I drove home and parked in my usual spot. My neighbor's cat watched me from the fence. As I walked to the door, I stepped inside and locked the deadbolt for the last time that week. I sat on my sofa and stared at the dark TV screen. My objective was complete, but my life was a blank slate. I reached into my pocket and found a small piece of paper. It was a note from Savannah I had missed earlier. She had written down a name I didn't recognize. I unfolded the scrap of paper with the unknown name. It was a local attorney specializing in estate law and trust funds. I realized Savannah hadn't just been stealing my identity for credit lines. She had been digging into our late grandfather's restricted accounts. My objective was to block her before she drained the last of the family's hidden legacy. I grabbed my car keys and headed back out into the cold morning. The engine groaned as I pulled away from the curb. The stakes had shifted from debt to inheritance. The law office was a quiet suite in a glass building. I met the attorney, a man named Miller, who looked at me with cautious eyes. He explained that someone claiming to be my representative had already called to initiate a total liquidation. Savannah had forged my signature on a power of attorney document weeks ago. The pressure mounted as Miller pulled up the digital files. He needed immediate proof of the forgery to stop the transfer. I felt the walls of the small office closing in on me. I produced the police report and the affidavit Jace had signed at the jail. Miller scanned the documents while the clock on the wall ticked like a hammer. He paused when he reached the final page of the trust agreement. "There is a clause here you need to see," he said. "My grandfather had stipulated that any criminal conviction would forfeit a beneficiary's entire share." The power balance shifted instantly. Savannah's arrest for fraud had just handed me total control over the entire family estate. I sat back. I realized then why Savannah was so desperate to frame me as a co-conspirator. If I went down with her, we would both lose the money. She was trying to take me out of the equation entirely. I instructed Miller to freeze every account immediately. We drafted a letter to the probate court citing the felony charges against my siblings and father. My hands were finally steady as I signed the true documents. I was the last man standing in a field of ruined reputations and lies. I left the office and walked toward a nearby park to breathe. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was thin and sounded distant. She wasn't yelling or blaming me for the arrests. She told me that she had found Savannah's secret stash of cash hidden in an old shoebox. There was nearly $40,000 in wrapped bills. It was the GoFundMe money that hadn't been frozen. My mother asked me what she should do with the stolen loot. I told her to take the box to the police station immediately. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I knew she was thinking about the bills as a way to survive the foreclosure. "Do the right thing for once, Mom," I said. She didn't promise anything before she hung up the phone. I realized I couldn't trust her to be honest even now. The family rot went all the way to the marrow. I sat on a bench and watched the pigeons. A black sedan pulled up to the curb near the park entrance. I recognized the driver as the same man who had idled outside my house. He stepped out of the car and walked toward me with a slow, deliberate gait. He wasn't Jace or my father. He looked like a professional collector. "Your brother owes a lot of people for those Tahoe markers," he said. I realized the casino wasn't the only entity looking for payment. Jace had borrowed from the wrong kind of shadow. The man sat on the bench beside me and lit a cigarette. He didn't threaten me with a weapon. He simply showed me a photo of my apartment door on his phone. There was a small red mark painted near the handle. "We know you have the trust money now," he whispered. The primary obstacle had evolved from family drama into a life-threatening debt. I felt a cold sweat break across my neck. I wasn't just fighting my blood anymore. I was fighting the people they had invited. I looked the man in the eye and didn't flinch. I told him the trust was locked in probate and couldn't be touched for months. It was a lie, but I said it with total conviction. He smiled and stood up, smoothing his coat. "We can wait, Brett," he said. "But the interest won't." He walked back to his sedan and drove away. I watched the car merge into the midday traffic. My victory felt like a noose tightening around my throat. I was officially the target. I walked back to my truck and locked the door. I realized I couldn't stay in Denver anymore. I had to disappear before the probate cleared and the collectors returned. I started a mental list of everything I needed to pack. I would sell the truck and take a bus to a city where no one knew my name. My life was a series of bridges I had to burn. I pulled out my phone and deleted every contact. Then I threw the device out the window. The bus terminal felt like a cold, echoing tomb at 4 in the morning. I carried only a single duffel bag and a thick envelope of cash. My objective was to reach Seattle and vanish before the probate news broke. The primary obstacle was the man in the dark sedan. He stood near the vending machines, watching the ticket counter with steady eyes. I pulled my cap lower and shifted toward the shadow of a pillar. My heart beat against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached the ticket kiosk and tapped the screen with steady fingers. A name appeared on the digital manifest that made me freeze. Savannah had not been processed into the county jail system. A mid-scene turn arrived when a news alert flashed on the overhead monitor. She had posted bail using the shoebox of cash my mother was supposed to return. The power balance shifted as I realized she was out. She was broke, angry, and coming for the rest of the inheritance. The collector, near the vending machines, moved toward me with a slow, rhythmic gait. I didn't wait for a confrontation or a polite greeting. I slipped through the back service door and into the maintenance alley. The air smelled of damp trash and wet pavement. I saw a parked delivery van with the engine idling. I climbed into the back and hid among the crates of industrial parts. The driver returned and slammed the heavy door shut. I was moving, but I was blind. The van lurched over the city streets for nearly an hour. I realized I was headed toward the industrial shipyards. The driver stopped and pulled a heavy metal lever to open the cargo hold. I stepped out into the gray light of a foggy pier. My mother was standing there, wrapped in a thin wool coat. She held a burner phone in her shaking hand. "They won't stop looking for you, Brett," she whispered. She looked like a ghost in the morning mist. I took the phone and saw a video message from an unknown number. It showed the interior of my apartment, completely stripped to the floorboards. The collectors had moved in the moment I left. They didn't want the inheritance anymore. They wanted the interest Jace had promised in blood. My mother handed me a small, rusted key to a locker in the shipyard. It was the only thing my father had left before he was arrested. The game had one last secret layer. I walked toward the rusted lockers as the fog swallowed the pier. I turned the key and pulled the heavy door open. Inside was a leather briefcase and a printed list of every offshore account my grandfather owned. Savannah's name was listed at the bottom as a primary beneficiary for a secret trust. She hadn't been stealing from me. She had been protecting her own claim from my father. I realized the war was never over. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Savannah.